So what I'm going to do next is I'm basically going to lift the helicopter off by smoothly adjusting the angle of attack of the rotor blades so as to create enough lift to leave the ground, and then I'm going to attempt to hover directly above the ground. Now, just in case some of you guys hadn't noticed, I'm a horrible helicopter pilot. I never managed to fly these things in the simulator, so we'll just see how bad I'm going to do today. Just please don't judge me. I know I'm not good at it. Alright, so basically the plan is to now use the rudder pedals only to try and stay as stationary as possible during this turn, which is already not working out as planned. I think I oversped an engine there, and turn in the direction that the runway is facing. And once we've done that, the plan is to just get into a bit of a hover here, and then dip the nose and begin accelerating forward. Now, even a helicopter does need some forward speed for a set of reasons. First of all, I'm obviously not going to get to my destination if I don't use some forward speed, and secondly, it is a lot easier to fly once you've actually got a specific forward speed. Also, as you might have noticed, we've started climbing. Once our speed increased, this is because the rotor blades work much more efficiently at a higher speed, which means that we'll need less power to maintain altitude or climb. And currently, my goal is to climb. Now, I've shown you previously in Plan G what route we'll be using for today, and as I'm about at the middle of the field, I'll just do a normal turn, just as I would in an airplane, although helicopters are fairly hard to coordinate, and turn away over the airfield to the north. And I'll fly the departure procedure, just as we discussed it earlier, getting to visual reference point Bravo, and from there on, the plan is to continue to the German Autobahn, and follow that until we get to the entryway points into Pattonville airspace. Alright, so as I'm climbing away here, I'm just going to start the X checklist. Plug in, do the after takeoff checklist. Landing lights are off, and the AFCS is all good. And the next checklist would be the cruise checklist, which is really simple. My GPS and navigation is set, my flight instruments are good, my engine instruments are good, and my fuel quantity is more than sufficient for today's flight. So the next part is just flying the airplane, or in this case, flying the helicopter. Now I'm using Plan G on a second screen here in order to kind of give me the necessary navigational information. I could have plugged this into the GPS on the helicopter, but as this is a VFR flight, I'm just going to try and orient myself in general with the help of Plan G and do the rest of my work looking outside the window. Now, as I mentioned, the Bell 429 is a twin-engined helicopter equipped with 2 turbine engines. It is actually a fairly capable helicopter, pretty expensive though as far as I know, in the real world at least. As I said, it's a freeware simulation, so go ahead and take a look at it if you're interested in flying helicopters at all. It definitely is worthwhile to check out, especially as X-Plane provides some of the best helicopter simulation you can get out there due to its special flight model theory. It's using blade element theory, which in really basic terms turns the aircraft or flying object that we're using in the sim into a lot of very, very small bits, and then calculates the flight dynamics for each and every one of those tiny, tiny bits, and thus can create very, very accurate flight dynamics, as it's calculating them with a lot of complex formulas for each and every one of those tiny bits of the model that it broke down earlier. Alright, we're approaching 3,000 feet here, which is kind of the planned cruising altitude here, flying at about 70 knots, which is really, really slow. So you might cruise this slow in an ultralight or Piper Cub aircraft maybe. And we're approaching waypoint Bravo. You can see something like a train station down there. And once we're at Bravo, we're just going to turn slightly to the left. And try and accelerate a bit. Now in the real world, I hope that helicopters are a bit easier to coordinate, because there you can kind of feel the yaw in the back of your pants. Something you definitely can't do in the simulator, where you have to entirely rely on your instruments to give you an accurate indication of whether you're side slipping or not. Of course, the goal is to always stay coordinated, but I'm really sorry, I'm not very good at that, especially in a helicopter. Alright. The special thing about flying helicopters is that they are technically unstable. An airplane is aerodynamically stable. That means that it will always try and maintain a stable flight path, kind of, and a helicopter just isn't. So that means that if the helicopter departs from the flight path you're currently commanding, it's going to continue departing from that flight path at a much higher and higher rate. You have to imagine it a bit as if you were holding a bowl and there was a ball inside of that bowl. And if you have an aerodynamically stable ball, that ball is always going to roll to the deepest point of that bowl. So it's going to roll right down to the center and stay there, obviously. And if you tip the bowl upside down and put the ball on the outside of the bowl, that is then kind of shaped not like a bowl but more like a ball, then if you place that ball on the center of the bowl, it's not going to stay there, but it's going to roll to either side, and the further it gets away from the center, the faster it's going to continue going away from the center. And that's kind of what helicopter flying as opposed to airplane flying is like, because a helicopter, as I mentioned earlier, is inherently unstable, whereas an airplane is inherently stable. So the airplane is the ball inside the bowl, and the helicopter is the ball outside of the bowl. And that's what kind of makes a helicopter so much harder to fly than an airplane. You'll notice that if I were to let go of the controls right now, my helicopter would depart from stable flight really quickly. So if I just stepped off the controls, it would immediately move off to the side and start yawing, and I'd actually have to do quite a bit of control juggling to get my helicopter back on track. I'm actually going to have to turn back onto the course now. But I hope that kind of demonstrated the stability that a helicopter has or doesn't have and how that actually works. Alright, we're almost there. It's not long now, so I'm just going to give you a quick rundown of our arrival procedure into Pattonville and finally the landing. Okay, before we're going to do the approach and land, we're just going to take a quick look at the charts. Now, as I mentioned earlier, mostly for noise abatement reasons, Pattonville is only approached via visual reference points. So there's no traffic pattern and nothing like that, as it usually is the case for small airfields. Instead, you always approach it via visual reference points, depending on the side you're approaching from. We're going to approach Wasserturm and Autokino, because we don't really mind winds as a helicopter. We're going to land on the helipad anyways, so we're not going to need to approach it from a specific runway side, and we can avoid airplane traffic that way, and it's going to be better for noise abatement. As we're a helicopter, we won't have any issue at all following these noise abatement procedures exactly, as we don't need to align ourselves with the runway during landing, as we're going to land on the helipad anyway, and the helicopter doesn't really need to be aligned with its landing runway, which is a great benefit for helicopters, as airplanes will always have to kind of cut corners here in order to reach the runway at the right angle. Helicopters won't. They'll just land it. As you can see, we're going to start out here at Wasserturm, which is basically a water tower in Germany. And then we're going to continue to Autokino, which is basically a car cinema. And we're going to try and avoid this residential area and this residential area, passing through this not built up area here, and then passing through this non-built up corridor here between this residential area and this residential area. As we're not an airplane, we can actually expand this a bit and avoid these tips of the residential area here too, which is gonna be a bit better for the people living there. As a helicopter pilot, it's of course our responsibility to make sure that we don't annoy people on the ground. So yeah, let's just try and do that, even though we're only flying in a simulator. Now, please keep in mind that these charts are outdated. Do not use them for real-world navigation. I am of course not a real-world pilot or flight instructor. I'm simply someone who's making videos for entertainment and flight simulation purposes only. Please do keep that in mind. Also, I'm going to put sources for all my charts and all the software I use in the description down below. Okay, welcome back to the cockpit. We're currently approaching our first visual reference point, known as Autokino, which is fairly close to the Autobahn, which is that big wide road you can see right below me. So as I'm approaching that road, I'm going to start to decelerate and most importantly descend, because as I said, I somehow have a habit to stay too high when I'm landing helicopters. Alright, so now I'm just going to turn towards that visual reference point and turn along the Autobahn, whilst working hard to keep my RPM constant and my helicopter flying. Now, as I will have explained when I talk you through the arrival, the first visual reference point is Wasserturm, not Autokino. Sorry about that. As I will have explained when I talk you through the arrival, the goal here is to kind of thread the needle through a sort of green area where there's no residential housing, because it's fairly understandable that you don't want to live in a place where you've got a helicopter buzzing over your house every 10 minutes. And that's why in a residential area like this one, the helicopters have to follow very specific procedures in order to avoid residential built-up areas. That's the plan, at least. In an airplane, actually, you can't follow these procedures perfectly because you'll have to align yourself with the runway at some point. Helicopters don't have to align themselves with runways, so instead of having a difficult time following noise abatement procedures, helicopters don't have a difficult time following noise abatement procedures, but much rather could do that fairly easily. So now I'm going to turn on the landing light, turn on my pitot heat just for safety reasons, and set it to SCAS, which it already is. And the next checklist we're going to do is the engine shutdown. But we're not quite that far into it yet. As you can see if you look down at the scenery, what I'm currently doing is I'm passing over trees instead of residential areas. And I'll be flying in over those fields right there, as I'm just above Autokino in a second here. Continuing my descent, you can see the airfield off to the right on the windscreen. And I'm just turning there. So let's see if we can get this helicopter landed. Now I'm warning you once again, I'm horrific at flying helicopters or anything that's not got a fixed wing, so don't expect to see the best helicopter landing skills, especially as we've got winds straight from the west at the moment. Well, let's just hope that this is going to work out. Alright. So basically what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try to decelerate a bit and descend as I'm flying over the airport boundary, so that I'll arrive nice and low and slow, and I'll have an easy time turning towards the helipad and landing. Our winds are coming straight from the west.
Check height.
I'm at my decision altitude. So my winds are coming straight from the west, more or less. And I know that, so I can compensate for those winds. And I'll try and get down as quickly as possible.
100.
So that those poor glider pilots, whose runway we're currently stealing, can continue to fly in and out of this airport without being disturbed by huge jet helicopters and the associated wake turbulence. Oh look, you can actually see the shadow of the helicopter there. And just going to turn for the helipad. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try and get a stable hover, so that I can nice and easily approach the helipad. Just dipping the nose forward a bit. I'm more or less softly flying towards the helipad, descending a bit along the way. This requires a lot of concentration, and you have to have just the right focus point for the eyes, and I really hope I'm not going to smash the helicopter down here. Alright. And down. Alright. So now we've just landed. Let's take a quick look outside and see how well we're standing on the helipad. Well, it's not all that terrible. I've seen worse helicopter landings by myself. So the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to start the engine shutdown checklist. So my trim is still on. And I'm going to turn off the two autopilots. Check that my pedals and cyclic are neutral. My collective is down. I turn off my landing lights and put my throttles to idle. Both of them. Get an RPM warning. My ELT is transmitting, and my transponder is off. Oh, that was in standby the entire time, but I'm not online, so that's not too much of an issue. So my pitot and static left and right are off, and my generators 1 and 2 coming off too, and engines 1 and 2 are off, and they're turning out. Now the next thing we're going to look for is actually the MGT. Once the MGT is stable or starts to decrease, which usually happens around 115, and our NG and an R are fairly low, which they already are, we're going to apply the rotor brake and we're going to wait, and before the rotor fully stops, put the rotor brake back up, and we're going to turn off our emergency lights, turn off our position lights and our anti-collision lights. We're not going to need to refuel for now, Instead, I'm going to turn off the battery switch. And that's it. Opening the door. And out we go. Welcome to Pattonville, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining me on this flying kayak full flight episode. Today we flew this Bell 429 helicopter from Stuttgart to Pattonville in the early evening, and I actually managed one of my more acceptable helicopter landings. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you're going to enjoy my next full flights also. At the moment, I'm working on a full flight video showing real passenger view footage as well as simulated cockpit views from Frankfurt to Budapest and from Budapest back to Frankfurt on an Embraer E195 and on an Airbus A321 respectively. Also, I'm working on new flying vlogs. Topics for those will be the developments in the new Microsoft Flight Simulator released in 2020, and I'm going to try and work on a few more tutorial videos about different topics concerning aviation. Also, you can expect the first non-aviation videos once I've settled on a topic. I've got a few ideas, but I'm not sure about anything final quite yet, to be released relatively soon. Also, I'd really be happy if you'd subscribe, maybe follow me on social media, and give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. I'm grateful for any support and feedback I get, and please keep in mind that I'm not a real-world pilot or flight instructor, and that my videos are for flight simulation and entertainment purpose only. If you liked this episode with me talking whilst flying, and if you liked an X-Plane 11 episode, tell me about it, and we'll see more of those in the future. Thank you for joining me, and safe travels, blue skies, and many happy landings. Have a good one.